Hello everyone. So far we have completed the survey data analysis part. So let me briefly summarize what we discussed about the survey data analysis. Now, first, of course, it starts with asking a research question, a causal one. Then you build up a logical model based on your research question. Now, within your logical model, the most important thing is you need to understand what is your dependent and what is your independent variable, and what's the relationship between these two variables. All right, so also you need to understand your unit of analysis and the theory behind the hypothesized relationship, either positive or negative. You need to back up the hypothesis with a theory. All right, suppose you figure all that out, and then you can start design your survey. Now, of course, we are talking about survey data analysis, right? So as a primary researcher, you are the person responsible for designing the survey. As I said, if you are, you can only ask one question. That question should be your dependent variable. And if you can ask two questions, the next question should be about your independent variable. Now, if you can ask more questions, then include more independent variables that are in your interest. So remember that you need to use different levels of measurement to measure different kind of variables. But for the dependent variable, the question when you design your question, I would suggest that you use a numerical measure. In other words, either interval or ratio questions, so that you can use linear regression instead of come up with either logit, O-logit, or M-logit, etc. All right, suppose you designed your survey, you put informed consent at the beginning of the survey and get the approval from the IRB, and then you are ready to go, right? But before that, you need to figure out what's how large should your sample, or what your sample should be. But when we talk about sample, it always come up with the population. You need to understand your population before you can come up with a sampling strategy. So the relationship between sample and population is, generally speaking, sample size is smaller than, either smaller or the same as your population, right? Because when your population size is so limited, less than 100, you probably can use them as use the consensus as your sample. So in that particular case, they are the same. All right, so when you figured out your population, then if you want a higher level of confidence interval, then of course you need more sample, larger sample size. Otherwise, if you can be satisfied with a lower confidence interval, then you only need a smaller sample size. So then you need to figure out whether or not you are going to use a random or non-random sampling strategy. All right, be sure to justify it. All right, suppose all good, you send out your survey, you collect the data, and then you prepare the data for analysis. Then we need to focus on two different outcome tables. One is called Descriptive Statistics, the other is called the Regression model. Now for Descriptive Statistics, we list the main variables that interest us, right? So if they are either interval ratio variables, then we calculated the minimum, maximum, median, mean, and standard deviation. Well, if it's categorical, then we only calculated the percentage, right? Then if we start with OLS, right? Of course, in reality, you probably have more than one independent variables because they simultaneously influence your dependent variables. Then you include them all in your model. that makes the model be a multivariable regression model. So then you'll run the multivariable regression, come up with the regression results table. So then you focus on three different things, right? First, check the p-value to see if the relationship is significant, statistically significant. If it is, then you check the coefficients to figure out one unit change in X will result in how many units change in Y. Then, of course, you need to first state them in one sentence, but this is about their statistical meaning, right? One unit change in your independent variable will cause how many unit change in your dependent variable. Then you translate it into plain language if the relationship is significant. Then you can probably also check the R square to see if your model is a good model. It can explain a decent amount of the variation in your dependent side. All right, so that will be all for the survey data analysis.